Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, as senior developers, tech leads, and architects, we're always wrestling with this one thing.
Yeah.
It's how to make our databases and our, object-oriented applications play nice together. We're
Yeah.
talking about ORMs.
ORMs, right. It's a classic problem.
It is?
I mean, we've been trying to solve this for years, right?
Yeah.
And it always feels like we're kind of compromising somewhere?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
But what if we had a tool? Like, what if
Right.
there was a tool that not only solved that problem, but did it in a way that was, I don't know, elegant, like modern? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, I'm listening.
That's where this thing Prisma ORM comes in.
Prisma ORM. Okay,
Yeah.
so not just another ORM.
Not just another ORM. No, no, no. What makes Prisma really interesting, especially for someone like you, leading a team, architecting these complex systems, is how it approaches the whole problem.
Okay.
It's not just about mapping objects to tables. It's about having this whole toolkit for database management that's built for how we build applications today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking type safety. I'm talking intuitive data modeling. I'm talking flexible workflows that fit into how you already do things.
All right, I'm definitely intrigued. I'm intrigued. So let's break this down a bit.
Yeah.
What are the pieces? Like, what are we actually working with when we talk about Prisma ORM?
So Prisma ORM, it's made up of three main parts, right?
Right.
There's Prisma Client,
Okay.
there's Prisma Migrate, and then there's this thing called Prisma Studio. And you, my friend, are going to love Prisma Studio.
Okay.
As a senior dev, you're going to love it. But just so you know, Prisma Studio is not open source. And it's really just meant for local development for now.
Gotcha. So three parts, each with its own role. Right?
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
So Prisma Client, that's your workhorse. That's the query builder for Node.js and TypeScript. It's what lets you talk to your database using content that you're already familiar with, right?
Yeah.
And it's all type safe.
Type safe. Okay.
So you can imagine that confidence of knowing that your database queries are checked at compile time. Like you're catching errors before they even hit production.
Right.
That's peace of mind, especially when you're responsible for some mission critical application.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Type safety, 100%. I mean, anyone who's spent, I've spent way too many hours debugging runtime errors.
Right.
So this is music to my ears.
Absolutely.
But, we also know we don't build projects in a vacuum, right? So how does this Prisma client, how does it fit into the bigger picture of my application?
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of Prisma Client, right? It's so versatile. Like whether you're building REST APIs, GraphQL APIs, gRPC APIs, whatever it is, Prisma Client just plugs right in.
Okay.
So you're not locked into any one way of doing things. You can use Prisma with whatever back-end stack you prefer.
Yeah.
Flexibility, right? That's what it's all about.
Absolutely. Flexibility. And minimizing that tech debt, right? That's what lets us sleep at night. You mentioned something called Prisma Schema earlier.
Right.
What is that?
Think of the Prisma schema like the foundation of your whole Prisma project.
Okay.
It's where you set up your data sources, where's your data coming from,
Right.
you define your generators. And most importantly, it's where you lay out your data model. That's
Yeah.
like the blueprint, right? It tells Prisma how it should be interacting with your database.
So essentially the Prisma schema is defining how my data is structured and how I can access it, right?
Precisely. And the data model you create in your Prisma schema, that's not just representing your database tables or collections or whatever you're using, right?
Yeah.
It also informs how you build queries using Prisma Client.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this tight integration between data modeling and actually querying the data. And that's what makes Prisma so intuitive and efficient.
Right.
And I'm sure you've worked with enough ORMs to know that that's not always the case.
Oh, yeah. Plenty of times I've been like, ugh, this feels like a chore.
Yeah.
Data modeling feels as a chore. And then querying it is this, tangled mess of abstractions.
Exactly.
So how do we actually create this data model in Prisma?
Yeah.
Is it all manual? Or can we, leverage existing schemas that we might have?
That's a great question, and Prisma gives you options here.
Okay.
Right, so you can either handcraft your data model using Prisma Migrate, which we'll talk more about later.
Okay.
But if you're already working with an existing database, you can actually use Prisma's introspection feature.
Okay.
So that means Prisma can look at your database, figure out what's going on, and then generate the data model for you automatically. It saves you a ton of time and effort.
Okay, so we can start fresh, or we can work with what we've already got.
Exactly.
I like that. That kind of flexibility is really key.
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with legacy systems, or maybe just tight deadlines.
Sure.
All right, so let's dig into this Prisma client a little bit more, our query builder. How does this thing actually work in practice?
Okay, so first things first, right? You got to install it.
Right.
You install the at Prisma Client NPM package. But here's where things get really interesting for senior devs like you.
Okay.
Once you've got that installed, Prisma automatically generates the client code based on your Prisma schema.
Wait, hold on. So that means we don't have to write all the, CRED operation. Like, we don't have to do all that manual mapping logic ourselves.
Exactly. You don't have to. Prisma takes care of all that heavy lifting for you.
Wow, that's a serious time saver.
Right. And all that generated code, it all lives neatly in your node-modules.prismaclient folder.
Okay.
And the best part is, whenever you make changes to your data model, all you got to do is run this command, Prisma generate, and Prisma regenerates the client code, keeping everything nice and in sync.
Prisma generate. Got it. But, it's one thing to generate code. It's another thing to make sure it plays well with the code base I've already got.
Right.
And we've all seen tools that, they promise integration, but then they just create more headaches than they solve.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where Prisma's real focus on developer experience shines through.
Okay.
And this whole regeneration process, this is where Prisma's integration with TypeScript really shines.
Okay.
You get all the benefits of static typing, right?
Yeah.
Type checking, auto-completion, error detection, all right there in your IDE.
Yeah.
Think about how that impacts code quality.
Right.
Especially when you've got multiple teams working on a big project.
Yeah, catching errors before they even reach runtime, that's huge.
Yeah.
It's like having a safety net, especially for those complex systems where, a tiny bug can just cascade into a disaster.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so you mentioned, I think earlier you mentioned two main workflows, right?
Right.
Prisma Migrate and then SQL migrations with introspection. Can you dig into those a little bit more?
Yeah, so Prisma Migrate is all about managing your database schema changes within your Prisma schema.
Okay.
So you basically define your database changes. You're saying, this is what I want to change, but you're doing it declaratively. And Prisma Migrate handles the rest. It generates all the SQL migration scripts for you.
So are we essentially saying goodbye to manual SQL migrations then?
Essentially, yes. Yes. But Prisma understands that sometimes that's just not feasible.
Right.
Right? So that's where the second workflow comes in. If you're already using SQL migrations because of how you do things, maybe because of some specific database requirements, Prisma still got you.
Okay.
You can use Prisma's introspection feature to keep your Prisma schema up to date.
So after every SQL migration, we just run introspection and Prisma updates the data model.
Exactly. So you get the best of both worlds. You still have the control of your SQL migrations, but you also get the benefit of Prisma's type-safe query builder and all the other cool stuff. It's about choosing the approach that fits your team's needs and the way you already do things.
Yeah, and that choice is crucial for us, right?
Yeah.
As senior developers, as tech leads, we have to weigh those pros and cons. Think about the team dynamics, how complex the project is, and, maintainability down the line.
Absolutely.
But you know what? Hold that thought. We're going to dive deeper into these workflows in the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah, there's a lot more to unpack here.
Yeah, there is. And trust me, there is a lot more to uncover.
So much more.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. So last time, we laid the groundwork.
We did.
We got a feel for what Prisma is all about, those components. And I got to say, that type safety, it's really calling to me. But, as someone who's leading a team, I need to know that a tool doesn't just sound good on paper.
Right.
It actually delivers when we get down to the code. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Let's get our hands dirty then.
Okay.
Let's imagine you're leading the team, building this massive e-commerce platform. You've got all this complex product data, user accounts, orders, the whole 9 yards.
Okay, yeah.
How's Prisma going to help you wrangle all that without those usual ORM headaches?
Yeah, I mean, that's the scenario that keeps me up at night,
Yeah,
right?
man.
So we've got Prisma client generated. Our schema's all defined.
Right.
What's next? How do we actually start querying data without getting lost in a SQL jungle?
Well, the syntax in Prisma Client, it's designed to feel really natural when you're working in a JavaScript or TypeScript environment.
Okay.
So let's say you need to grab all the products from your database.
Yeah.
Super simple, right? It's just prisma.product.findMany. Boom, done.
All right, that's pretty clean.
It is.
But what about like filtering? Because in e-commerce, you're always dealing with searches, filters, sorting. Users want to find like blue shirts, size large, under $50.
Mm-hmm.
How does Prisma handle that kind of complexity?
Where clauses
Mm-hmm.
are going to be your best friend.
Okay.
So for example, let's say you want to find all blue shirts that are size large. You would just do prisma.product.findMany. You can add multiple conditions. You can use operators like greater than or less than for
Yeah.
price ranges, whatever you need. It's really expressive,
Right.
but you're still keeping that type safety we talked about.
So I'm not giving up any of the power of SQL, but I'm not writing raw SQL either.
Exactly.
It's like that sweet spot where I can leverage the database, but I'm still in my comfortable type-safe world.
You got it. And, as a senior dev, you know how tricky database relationships can be.
Oh, yeah.
So in this e-commerce example, our products, they have categories, they have reviews, maybe they've even got related items.
Right.
How do you fetch all that without having to write a ton of queries?
That's usually where ORMs start to feel clunky, right?
Yeah.
You either end up with way too many queries, or you've got these giant join statements that are impossible to debug.
Nightmare. Prisma handles this beautifully with the include option. So imagine you're fetching a product, right?
Okay.
You want to get its category and its reviews all in one go. You just do prisma.product.findUnique, where.find11, include.category.truereviews.toVec2. And you get back this nice structured object with all the related data nested inside.
Wait, so one query and I get all the data I need,
Yeah.
and it's still readable.
Exactly.
Man, as an architect, that kind of efficiency at the data layer, that's gold. It's not just about writing neat code. It's about performance, responsiveness for the user.
Huge difference, especially as your application starts to scale.
Yeah.
You're not getting bogged down by inefficient data fetching because Prisma is doing all the optimization in the background.
Okay, so we're querying, we're filtering, we're including related data. It's all looking good.
Yeah.
But what about the other side of things? What about creating, updating, deleting data?
Just as intuitive. So to create a new product, you would do prisma.product.create. Data? Awesome shirt. Price? Updating is prisma.product.update. And for deleting, you guessed it, prisma.product.delete.
Deletion, that always makes me a little nervous, right?
I understand.
We've all heard the horror stories of accidentally wiping out data because of poorly handled relationships.
Yeah.
How does Prisma help us avoid that?
Yeah.
Especially for us senior devs, the ones who are responsible if something goes wrong.
Sure. I mean, Prisma's not going to magically solve all your data integrity issues, right?
Yeah.
You still need to design your schema carefully.
Right.
Make sure your relationships are set up correctly.
Yeah.
But what it does do is it gives you this clear, consistent API for these operations, which means you're a lot less likely to make mistakes. And remember, you're working with TypeScript here.
Right.
So if you try to delete something that's going to violate your referential integrity, your code won't even compile.
Right. That's the kind of safety net I'm talking about. It's not about eliminating all risk. It's about having those guardrails in place.
Exactly.
Especially as the team grows, that consistency, that type safety, it just becomes so much more important.
It takes a lot of the mental burden off the developers.
Yeah.
They can focus on building features, not
Yeah.
fighting with the ORM.
That's the dream.
Yeah.
So this is all giving me a much better understanding of how Prisma works in a real-world setting.
Great.
But I am curious, from your experience, are there any common pitfalls, or maybe even just misconceptions that senior developers often have when they first encounter Prisma?
One thing I see sometimes is developers thinking that Prisma is like this magic bullet,
Okay.
that it's going to like completely eliminate the need to understand SQL or like database fundamentals.
Right.
Now, while it does abstract away a lot of the complexity, you still need that foundational knowledge.
Yeah.
You need to be able to design efficient schemas, write performant queries.
It's like any powerful tool, right? Like you can use a power drill to put a screw in a piece of wood.
Right.
But you still need to know how much pressure to apply, what kind of screw to use.
Exactly.
The tool doesn't replace the craftsmanship.
100%. Another misconception is that Prisma is only for brand new projects.
Okay.
Now, while it does work really well for those, its flexibility means it can also be integrated with existing databases, legacy systems, whatever you've got. You can adopt it gradually alongside your current infrastructure.
That's huge for a lot of us, right? We're not always starting from scratch.
Right.
Being able to introduce a tool like Prisma without having to do a massive rewrite, that's a game changer.
Absolutely. And one last thing before we move on, don't underestimate the value of Prisma's documentation. It's comprehensive, it's well-written, and it's full of practical examples. That tells you a lot about how much they care about the developer experience.
Yeah, good documentation is invaluable,
Yeah.
especially when you're trying to evaluate a new tool and get your team up to speed quickly. But you know what? Hold that thought, because we've covered a lot of ground, from basic querying to handling those relationships, even those tricky deletions.
We have.
But there's still more to explore.
There is.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. So we've explored Prisma Client, seen how it handles all that complex data. And honestly, I'm impressed. But as anyone who's led a project knows, the code is just one piece of the puzzle.
Mm.
It's how our systems change over time, how they evolve. That's where the real challenges pop up.
hmm
And I think that's where Prisma Migrate comes in, right?
You're absolutely right. As senior devs, as architects, we're not just building for today, we're building for tomorrow.
Right.
Our applications are going to evolve, the requirements are going to change. Our database schema has to keep up. And that's what makes Prisma Migrate so powerful. It gives you that structure, that automation for managing those database migrations. And that means consistency and reliability, especially in those big, complex projects.
Absolutely. We did touch on migrations a bit earlier. But for anyone just joining us, could you maybe just recap why this is so important for senior devs? And how does Prisma's approach differ from, what we might be used to?
Think back to the old days, right? The days of manual SQL migrations. You've got multiple developers potentially making changes that conflict. The risk of errors, the sheer amount of time it took to manage everything. Prisma Migrate, it changes all that. It lets you define those schema changes, but you do it right within your Prisma schema. You're using their migration language.
So we're basically describing what we want our schema to look like, and Prisma figures out the SQL and make it happen. That's a pretty big shift.
Exactly. It's a declarative approach, just like we've seen with the rest of Prisma. You focus on what needs to change, and Prisma handles the how. It generates the SQL migration scripts for you. It simplifies things a lot, especially for those really complicated changes.
That's definitely appealing, especially
hmm
when you're trying to keep a whole team on the same page. Sure. But what about those of us who are already using SQL migrations? Maybe because of our existing tools or company policies. Does Prisma force us to abandon everything we know?
Not at all. Flexibility is key with Prisma. If you're using SQL migrations, you can use Prisma's introspection feature. So after each SQL migration, you just introspect your database, and Prisma updates your Prisma schema to match. It's pretty seamless.
So even if we can't go all in on Prisma Migrate, we can still keep our Prisma schema in sync with our actual database.
Exactly.
That's good to know. Okay, so let's get practical for a second. You're a seasoned dev, you've seen migrations done well, and let's be honest, you've probably seen some migrations go horribly wrong.
Oh, yeah.
What advice would you give to, let's say, a senior developer who's tasked with guiding their team on how to use Prisma Migrate effectively?
Communication is key, right? And collaboration. Everyone on the team needs to be on the same page. They need to be following consistent conventions. That means clear naming for your migrations, descriptive commit messages, thorough reviews before anything goes to production.
Yeah, it's like basic development hygiene.
It is.
But we all know those little details, they can slip, especially when the pressure's on.
Absolutely. And when it comes to migrations, those slip-ups, they can have serious consequences. If your migration history is a mess, it can be really tough to understand how your database got to where it is. And that leads to confusion and errors down the road.
So treat migrations with the same care you treat your application code.
Right.
Version control, code reviews, testing, the whole 9 yards.
All of it.
Speaking of testing, how does that fit into the whole Prisma Migrate workflow? We can't just apply migrations to production and cross our fingers, right?
Definitely not. Testing your migrations is just as important as testing any other part of your application. You should have a dedicated test database where you can apply those migrations, run your tests, and make sure everything is working as expected.
And I'm guessing Prisma has tools to help us with that testing process.
Oh, absolutely. Prisma provides utilities to make it easy to set up a test environment, apply those migrations, and run your tests. They understand that testing isn't optional. It's essential if you want to make sure your application is reliable.
This has been a really great deep dive into Prisma ORM.
It has.
We started with the core components, saw how it works in the real world. We looked at how Prisma Client makes querying and data manipulation easier. And now we've explored Prisma Migrate for managing our schema as things change. And throughout it all, we've seen how Prisma's focus on type safety, flexibility, and clear, well-documented APIs, they make a big difference for us. Senior devs, tech leads, architects, everyone.
We've only scratched the surface, really. There's a whole ecosystem out there waiting to be explored. But for me, the big takeaway is this. Prisma lets teams build better software. It takes the friction out of working with databases so you can focus on what really matters, delivering value to your users. Before we wrap up, I do have one final thought, maybe a bit provocative for our listeners out there. We've talked about the technical benefits, but how might using Prisma ORM actually change the dynamics within a team? Could it lead to better collaboration, higher code quality, maybe even a stronger sense of ownership over that data layer? Something to consider as you start exploring Prisma. And for anyone ready to dive in, check out Prisma's documentation. It's fantastic. You'll find everything you need to get up and running.
And if you're looking for more deep dives, tips, insights into software development, make sure to subscribe to Pragmatic Reviews on YouTube. Hit that like button, leave us a comment, and join our community of passionate devs. Until next time, keep on coding.